As rebel forces organized under a provisional government, Jim Bowie was assigned in January 1836 to inspect the Alamo to consider demolishing the cannon ramps and other fortifications Mexican soldiers had built inside the mission. Davy Crockett arrived in February. William Travis came as well. As a leader in the war movement, he had earned the rank of lieutenant colonel in the Texan Army. He and Bowie shared command of the Alamo. As the garrison grew to about 150 men, waiting for the Mexican armies they knew would be coming. Manning the Alamo were about 150 defenders, an odd mix that included Europeans and Tejanos, but the majority were Americans, most of them illegal immigrants who had arrived in Texas only weeks before the siege.
The Alamo defenders were not, most of them were not colonists, were people that had just arrived to support the war, to get some land, and to get the independence and annexation of Texas to the United States.
But before there was a battle at the Alamo, there was a siege. It began on February 23, 1836, when the Mexicans hung a red flag at the top of San Antonio's San Fernando Church. Visible from the Alamo, it was the flag of no quarter, a well-recognized military signal and a blunt message from the Mexicans. Surrender now, or every last defender will be put to the sword.
It was very important to get the Alamo back because it was Mexican territory and they were illegals and people that were defying Mexican government.
Even for the Mexicans as well. They were fighting in defense of their country against an armed invasion. And here at the Alamo, they had an opportunity to break the will of this insurrection. And at this point, that's what it was, an insurrection.
The men of the Alamo responded with a defiant statement of their own. Firing a single cannon shot, the bravado of the Texans was made perfectly clear. The old mission was never built for military use, but its protection seemed adequate, at least at the start of the siege. About 17 cannons were scattered at various positions. Riflemen did not have the loopholes and other firing ports found in a proper fortress, but the Texans could safely lay low in the thick walls as they aimed rifles at Mexican troops, still hundreds of yards distant. As the siege began, the Texans effectively lost one of their most charismatic leaders. Jim Bowie was suddenly bedridden by illness, thought to be advanced tuberculosis. The most fearless Texian of them all would no longer be a factor at the Alamo. Command of the men fell to William Barrett Travis alone. The young lawyer from Alabama who so advocated war for Texas independence now confronted the fight of his life. Outside the walls, General Santa Anna put his cannons to work, knowing the Alamo could not be taken immediately, and that time was on his side.
Santa Anna and his officers carry out a siege that takes nearly 2 weeks to complete, with the final battle being what people remember as the Battle of the Alamo.
On the first day of the siege, Mexican troops were lined up on the banks of the San Antonio River. Santa Anna's cannons slowly battered away at the walls of the fort. It was military state-of-the-art for 1836. On February 23rd, as the siege began, Travis wrote the first of several letters that couriers sneaking out of the Alamo would carry. He addressed it to his fellow citizens and compatriots and pledged victory or death. But he also made an urgent plea for reinforcements.
They knew that they could not hold that fort indefinitely. We will hold this place till the rest of Texas can join us. And you can tell from every letter that Travis writes from the Alamo, every letter is a plea. Okay, guys, they're here now. We really could use your help. Now would be a good time.
Travis wrote his letters to Texas provisional government. He waited for relief, but he never received a reply. The governmental council was 100 miles away. So was the Texian military leader, General Sam Houston. There was wide disagreement on how to defend against the Mexicans, and so nothing was done at all. February 25th, day 3. Santa Anna launched an infantry attack against the Alamo south wall. Crockett proved his value, his magnetic personality inspiring the defenders to fight ferociously. As Travis wrote, the Honorable David Crockett was seen at all points, animating the men to do their duty. However, the day belonged to the Mexicans.
The attack on the 25th is an advance on the part of Santa Anna. He is on the Texian side of the river, and he controls the Gonzales Road.
Despite Mexican control of the roads, the Tejano patriot Juan Seguin slipped out that night with another dispatch from Travis, again urging other Texas communities to send reinforcements. Seguin's mission kept him away from the Alamo when the final battle took place. However, as the days passed, Alamo couriers faced increasing danger. From his newly won spot on the Texan side of the river, Santa Anna expanded his siege around the Alamo. As he strengthened his chokehold on the Alamo, Santa Anna continued his bombardment of its walls. This run of stonework approximates the height and thickness of the Alamo walls. It was built in Texas by a modern-day contractor. 30 of these 6-pound cannonballs, close to the size used by Santa Anna at the Alamo, will be fired at the test wall. The cannon is placed a little over 200 yards away, just outside the range of Texan riflemen at the Alamo. Then the test of cannon versus wall gets underway. The first shot hits the lower right corner, lodging more than 1.5 feet inside the wall. Compared to modern explosive shells, a cannonball does little damage. That's why a siege, like that at the Alamo, took so long. On March 1st, day 8 of the siege, reinforcements arrived. Under cover of darkness, 32 men sneaked into the Alamo. They came from nearby Gonzales, the town where the war had started with a defiant banner and a cannon shot. The new troops, however few, gave the beleaguered Travis a glimmer of hope. Altogether, as many as 100 men made it into the Alamo during the siege, bringing the garrison's strength to 250. In light of the scant reinforcements, on March 3rd, the 10th day of the siege, Travis wrote another of his letters to the outside world. But now, his defiant tone gave way to bitterness.
He says, look, I'm going to stay here, and my men are going to stay here, and we may well die here. And he said, our bones will reproach our countrymen for their neglect.
On day 12 of the siege, March 5th, Santa Anna decided to bring it to an end. He announced a time for the final assault on the Alamo, the next morning at 5 a.m. He met with his officers to lay out the plan. Soldiers were ordered to scale the Alamo walls at any cost. No prisoners were to be taken. All the Alamo defenders must die. On the afternoon before the final battle, Santa Anna called a halt to the artillery bombardment. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, the ragged Alamo defenders could finally rest. But even as the Texans drifted off to sleep, Mexican soldiers quietly took their battle positions. In a few hours, both sides would rise to the call of war and fight the epic Alamo battle.
¡Viva Santa Anna! ¡Viva la República!
The shouts spread, bugles sounded, and the troops advanced. Within the Alamo, Texans awakened to the clamor of war. Travis rallied his men to the walls, and the fierce fighting began. Santa Anna's battle plan called for advancing columns to hit the Alamo on 3 sides. The smallest, 125 men, attacked the south wall. More than 400 soldiers charged in from the east. Nearly 800 attacked the north wall and the northwest corner. Inside the walls, Jim Bowie remained on his sickbed. He was too ill to take part in the fighting at all. Davy Crockett led a group of defenders at the Alamo's south wall, successfully fending off the Mexican attack there. William Travis rushed to the north wall with his slave Joe fighting alongside him. A moment later, Travis was dead. He had been a leader in the movement to fight for Texas independence. Now, his war was over.
It's Joe who sees his master go down with a bullet to the head. But after that, Joe later says that he simply goes and hides and takes no further part in the actual battle itself.
Though Travis was killed early in the battle, the Alamo defenders fought on without their commander. Skilled Texan riflemen mounted the walls, pouring fire on the Mexicans as fast as they could. Cannons loaded with rusty chains, nails, and other scraps pounded the invading columns with deadly effect. And for a time, the attack stalled. But Santa Anna had 400 fresh soldiers in reserve, and he sent them against the north wall. Now the sheer force of numbers overwhelmed the Texans as Mexican troops neared the top.
No military plan survives contact with the enemy. Santa Anna is no different. But his plan must have been somewhat solid, as well as his preparation, because it only takes a half hour once the attack is commenced for the Mexicans to breach the Alamo's defenses.
Those defenses were nothing more than the Alamo's thick walls, which now proved fatal to the Texan riflemen. With the Mexicans on the ground below, the Texans had to stand up to fire their rifles, making them easy targets for enemy muskets. Soon after the north wall defenses collapsed, the west wall was breached, and Mexican soldiers poured into the Alamo from two sides. The surviving Texans fell back to their second line of defense, the long barracks on the east side of the Alamo. Outside, in the courtyard, Mexican soldiers discovered the Alamo defenders had neglected to disable the fort's artillery. It was a costly error. The invading troops turned the Texans' own cannons back toward the long barracks. What should have been a refuge became a death trap. Eventually, they came upon Jim Bowie. Jim Bowie died from several gunshots. He was a man whose bravery and personal magnetism helped rally support to the Texas war movement. But his death was far from glorious. Davy Crockett was said to be among the last to fall. Though whether he died fighting or was executed is a matter still open to question. Few women and children who lived in some Alamo buildings were inside the walls and hid during the battle. They were not part of the defending garrison and were spared by the Mexicans, but a number of other people lived as well. Another survivor was Travis's slave Joe, who was returned to Travis's family in the United States. But on the one-year anniversary of the battle, he escaped. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna was the victor of the Battle of the Alamo, a military hero to the nation of Mexico. He had risen to the pinnacle of power. But in lacking mercy for the vanquished, he suffered a fatal flaw. Santa Anna hoped to crush the spirit of rebellious Texans in other parts of the state. The effect was just the opposite.